Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to hear from acclaimed writer Irvine Welsh. Can we have a warm welcome? Delighted to be here with you today. Such a privilege to speak with you. A warm welcome also to all of you from the National Arts Council, our organizing partner and key venue. The Arts House is the reason that we're here, so thank you very much to the Arts House. In a few minutes, we are going to get a front row seat of the view of the world from the mind of an acclaimed writer of 12 novels, many stories and screenplays, Irvine Welsh. Known for controversy, his seminal novels include Ecstasy and Filth, novels that have been straight-out bestsellers and modern classics. Not without his literary critics, his work continues to demonstrate commercial success. Born in Edinburgh, Scotland, his first novel, Trainspotting, a powerful and violent black comedy about working-class heroin addicts, sold almost 1 million copies in the UK alone, and has become a worldwide phenomenon. Trainspotting was published in 1993, and by August 1995, Welsh was able to give up his day job. Trainspotting and its sequel has been adapted into iconic films by Danny Boyle. His latest novel, Dead Men's Trousers, reunites the characters from Trainspotting. Irvine Welsh's writing has been described as shady, crazy, and dark, and scatology turned high art. His novels, say his fans, have a way of showing us the ugly truth of who we really are. Here to share with us his response to an important question of our time. Who are we, and where do we belong? Please welcome Irvine Welsh.
Thanks very much, Michelle. So thank you for coming along on Sunday and giving up your Sunday morning, and I'm going to repay you now by boring you shitless with this incredibly strange kind of topic. I tend to be a bit pacey, so I'm going to walk around a little bit. Who are we and where do we belong? And I think it's like, I think the humanity is kind of in a bit of an existential crisis now. I mean, I don't think we know exactly what's ahead for us. We don't know how this is all going to pan out. And we do kind of live in quite kind of historically unprecedented times. And I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. We've kind of, we opted for, technology, but I think the first reason, I think the main kind of thing is technology has pushed us towards a kind of whole different sort of mode of production with the growth of the internet and information technology, and we opted, and that was a force for globalization, and we opted for a neoliberal model of globalization, which I think was kind of a terrible mistake, really. And now we have a situation where everything that we produce, all our goods that we produce, can be manufactured at zero cost. So we're moving into a world basically without profit and without wage. So we're moving into a post-wage economy. And we're moving from, we're moving out in the long form, moving out of capitalism and into conceptualism, into a kind of place where we're not actually making primarily physical goods, because they can be made at zero cost. I mean, everything can be photocopied or manufactured at no cost nowadays. I mean, I remember when I left school, I got a job as a television mechanic, and we used to go around and replace people's TV sets. And I would take I would have these old, you would test all these old valves in the TV set, and you would just replace a valve. And then the valve was replaced by transistors. You would replace the you would check out the transistors on the avometer, and you would all these things like the kind of the resistors, the capacitors, and you would take these out and you would put new ones in. And then you just you just replace the circuit board, basically. And now you just replace the TV set. If a TV set goes wrong, you just throw it away and get another one. And TV sets kind of get cheaper and cheaper all the time because it costs nothing to make. There's no cost practically in making these things. So how do you kind of pay wages and make profits in that kind of technological era? And once you have that technology, it can't be kind of uninvented, basically. So we're deindustrializing, and we're seeing the end of basically these kind of competing but complementary twins of industrialism, which are capitalism and socialism. They can't they can't logically exist in the way that they did previously, because to have a capitalist society, you have to have consumers. But when wages are heading towards zero, you can't really, people can't kind of buy consumer goods, basically, although these goods are actually going towards zero cost. And they can't pay taxes, right, to build infrastructure and to kind of to finance these socialistic projects, because there is no, they just don't have any wages, so no wages equals no taxes, basically. So one of the most interesting things was the capitulation of what I would call the kind of the soft left of social democracy, who kind of people like Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and a lot of kind of governments in Europe, they completely bought into the neoliberal model, which came from kind of Thatcher and Reagan, and it's ironic that the neoliberal model, which was supposed to be the kind of the ultimate kind of liberation of capitalism and rolling back the state, has kind of become exposed as essentially a Marxist model, which is incredibly ironic, because it wasn't really about kind of competition in the marketplace. It was about basically destroying the market through the natural kind of the mergers and acquisitions culture, particularly of the 80s. So now, if you think about it, every kind of every industry tends towards monopoly or oligopoly. I mean, there's only one place that you can kind of you can only have one Facebook, you can only have one Twitter in these tech companies. If you look at the big aircraft designers, you can only have kind of Boeing and Lockheed. You can't really have more than a couple of players in that industry, and that changes all the politics. It means that if you're farming out everything, if the state farms out everything to the private sector, basically the state becomes co-opted into that kind of corporate world. So the division now between government and business is gone, and that has tremendous ramifications. So what we see now with all this is that people become a bit more. People become very sort of removed. Citizens become very removed from the government, even if it's a democracy. I mean, I remember I was just in Australia recently, and I saw that Australia had they've had about 5 prime ministers or something in the last 2 weeks, and then they had about prior to that they had since the war they only had 5 basically. It's a bit like kind of it's a bit like West Ham football managers basically. They've all kind of they just keep coming thick and fast now. And I was looking about this guy, the guy who was deposed. It was purely a war within his own party, and everybody else was completely disenfranchised from it. All the voters were completely disenfranchised from this thing. And that's what happens now. I mean, it's like the Brexit thing in the UK. It's basically a war between 2 wings of the Conservative Party, 2 wings of the British ruling class, the globalist wing and the nativist wing. And these people are competing with themselves for power, and competing with themselves for the sort of for the idea of which method is the best way for us to exploit our citizens. Is it in a global order, or is it in a kind of nationalistic order where people are divided and competing against each other? So this is the kind of debate, really, and the rest of us have all been kind of sidelined, really. We've all been sidelined in this kind of democracy. So I think the collapse of that kind of social democratic kind of centre-left, and also I think also the pro-market centre-right to these forces of corporatism have led to the opposition of global politics coming purely from nativists, kind of neo-fascists, basically. People who capitalize on immigration caused by the displacement of people through the failure of the neoliberal order to secure and develop the standards of living or peace and security in the poorer countries. And these are the old divisions that have kind of been fostered and created by imperialism. And we still have these kind of very hierarchical imperialistic states like Britain, like Spain. You look at the way Spain kind of treats people from Catalan when they're trying to exercise their democratic rights. It doesn't. It sees itself as an indivisible imperialistic country still. The United States too. And I think that the interesting thing to me is, with this whole, all this identity politics originally came from the left. It originally came from oppressed groups and peoples trying to kind of to get solidarity, to secure rights, to advocate rights. And now it's kind of been appropriated by right-wing forces who've exploited the people from traditional communities who feel that they've been failed by the system, basically. And they feel that immigration has led to people coming in and competing with them and taking their jobs and undercutting them and all that kind of stuff that we constantly hear. And I think that why is it when people are, when very wealthy people have all this, they've had everything going for them in the last 30 years, there's been a massive transfer of resources to the 1% of the population. Why are all these people with money so fucking miserable and anxious, just like the rest of us? And I think that it's probably because they recognize that in the long run, the technology that we're developing is actually counterintuitive to things like hierarchical elites, imperialist nation states, the patriarchy, and gender division. And that's because, you know, if we're no longer tethered to fields and factories, there is no basis for the division of labor. There is no basis for these kind of, for all that kind of discrimination that existed in the past. So they have this kind of thing that we can't pay wages anymore. How are we going to maintain control, basically? Because you look at all these great, you look at all these profiles of people in Forbes and all these kind of things, you know, about great men of history and all that, and we have all this vainglorious crap that we have to indulge, kind of all these wankers with all this kind of profiles that you have of them. Once they stop paying wages, nobody's going to give a fuck, you know. So how do they get over that? And I think one of the ways they have been getting over that is to kind of divide people, is to put people against each other, particularly people from different ethnic groups, particularly people of different genders, and people of different ages, the old and the young. So we are all in this this kind of existential crisis together, in a sense, and we have that big kind of perennial problem that Bertrand Russell talked about, that you know, dumb people are always certain and clever people are full of doubt, and you can't really trust anybody who isn't confused and full of doubt in the world right now. But we crave the illusion of false certainty, and especially in times of great change. And we love the illusion that we can somehow go back in time to a supposed golden era that never was. And I think a lot of that is to do with the demographics and the elderly population now. And you think about it now, it's like everything is a bit of a neoliberal scam. I mean, housing's a scam, basically. They want, you know, young people. They want to get they want young people to help them get their parents' assets, basically. So the banks want your houses, basically. The education is a massive scam. I mean, education is like universities are basically tied to the banks. They work with the banks so that people can send their kids there and continue to pay for them, to pay for worthless degrees that aren't vocational because there's not going to be any jobs anyway. And then they want them to pay for internships. They want them to take on unpaid internships. And that's just a way of getting everybody's assets, basically, and depleting everybody's assets. But it's obviously, once these assets have gone, they've gone. And it's a finite sort of trick that they... kind of what really sort of happens, what does actually happen. And it's fun, it's one of the things I noticed with the Brexit thing in Britain is that I was watching the guys that were responsible for Brexit, and they were saying like these governments have farmed out everything to the private sector, so they couldn't actually strike up these trade deals. They need to replace the European Union. They didn't actually know how to do it. They were like, and they had that kind of sense of, when you saw like David Davis, he had this kind of expression, and he was the minister responsible for Brexit and for kind of, he had this kind of shocked, well, how the fuck do they expect us to do this? How do they expect us to make trade deals? That's not been our job. It's been the European Union's job, or everything has been farmed out. So they don't actually know how to physically govern anymore. They just don't know how to do it. And they don't actually see it as their job, basically. So the function of that, I think people now see it as, see politics as a kind of, it's almost like a game show. It's something that happens. It's like a reality TV show. It's entertainment. It's not something that we're actually involved in. And it's a very kind of, I think it's a very tempting thing, and I kind of see it as like, when you look at what's happened in Brazil recently, and I think the paradigm is kind of what I'll call is the age of assholism, where every country is on a quest to find the very biggest asshole in their population who can do the most damage, and then they kind of vote for them, basically. And then they hate them, but they keep voting for them. And I think there's like, again, you want somebody who is ripping everybody off, but can kind of recite these kind of sort of platitudes and get people all kind of sort of wound up about some external enemy. But so I think it's like, it plays on our fears, but I think there's also, amongst the populace, I think there's also a phantom anarchy to it. I think people are actually saying, let's just let this asshole run with this, because the system's fucked anyway. So he's going to fuck it up quicker than anybody else. Then we can move on to the next thing. But just let them tear it apart. So I think it's a dangerous game to play, basically. But you can see why people kind of want to do that. So against that now, people are more kind of identified, I think, with kind of psychological and lifestyle communities. We basically identify with people who do the same things as us, wherever they live. It might not be our neighbors or the people down the road. We spend so much time online. We spend so much time in all these different kind of, in all these groups within our own communities. We spend so much time in our we have our kind of drinking group in the pub, and we have our Pilates group, basically, and the two don't really cross over, But we're in this kind of very, very strange sort of era, basically, and so that's kind of, that's my kind of, the way that I see the world starting to unravel. And I mean, I've been very, very fortunate that I can kind of think about all this. I can pontificate because I don't have a proper job, and I can take off, and I can travel, and I can speak to people from different countries, and I can live in different countries. And most people don't have that luxury. Most people are kind of living in the here and now, and most politicians are tied to an election cycle, and they don't really, it's like kind of. I remember when you had when I first got interested in what was going on in the world politically when I was younger. There was always these kind of very practical kind of people that were involved in politics. There was always people kind of feathering their own nests and all that kind of stuff. But there was also kind of a lot of idealists, a lot of real visionaries who've gone into politics and who thought kind of, this is the kind of society we want to build. This is what's kind of happening in the long run. This is what's happening in the long term. Now politicians, I mean, in Britain and in America particularly, I mean, these people are just like estate agents or lawyers. They're just completely self-serving. There's not even a kind of, there's not even a sort of a pretense of being kind of public servants. It's like they might track an opinion poll to see what people are thinking, but there's not a kind of sense of them as being there to serve the public anymore. They are there to serve themselves. They're there to help themselves to the resources of the country, which is basically everybody's resources. And it brought it home to me that when I read that Trump book, The Fire and the Fury, which is like a big, long Vanity Fair kind of essay, which I kind of enjoyed, but it struck me that the only person that had any principle at all, and everybody else, every single person was out for themselves. They didn't see themselves as public servants in any way at all. The only person that kind of had any principle at all was Steve Bannon, who's a Nazi, basically, because he has some ideological basis for what he was trying to do. The rest of them were trying just simply to feather their own nest. I saw that this LBJ film when Woody Harrelson was playing LBJ. And it wasn't a great film, but it was interesting because they were, it was a kind of still a corrupt house full of liars, basically. But the overriding thing that they all had was that they were actually there to serve the people. And that was the bedrock of how they felt. Even if they were doing dodgy deals and feathering their own nest and telling blatant lies. And I think that's what's the most interesting thing and the most scary thing that's happened in the last kind of decade, really. And I think it's what the 30 years of neoliberalism have given us, is that idea that there is no public service, there is no sense of serving the public anymore. If you go into anything, you're there to look after yourself, you're there to look after your friends and your families and your associates, and you will compete with people like you for that kind of power, for that kind of privilege. And that's what, and the rest of us are kind of shut outside watching this weird kind of circus going on. And that's been the biggest change, I think. And that's, that's to do with the kind of, the systemic corruption, the money that's in the system, the way that democracy's kind of been circumvented by the lobby system and by all the super PACs. And so we don't really have, it's like voting now, I think, has become, at best, a very, very kind of blunt instrument for democracy. So what I would like to see, this is trying to be helpful and to suggest alternatives. What I would like to see happen in the future would be, I would like to abolish voting and replace it with a lottery, basically. That basically every citizen in every single country gets a lottery ticket, and you have a lottery every 5 years, and you get maybe, say the parliament holds about, maybe it's a 300 kind of seat parliament, so you get 300 people will become they become the members of that parliament, they become the legislators, they become the politicians for 5 years only. And this is an old model. It's kind of the old Italian city-states model, so it's not a new thing. But a widespread lottery, and you get these kind of 300 people. Then you want a cabinet of about 50. So you have, within these 300 people, you have a lottery, and you pick the cabinet of about 50. And then within that cabinet of about 50, you have a lottery, and you pick the prime minister. So what that means is that it's random. There can be no interest groups that can advocate for one person or another person. It also means that you have a massive cross-section of everybody is represented. All ethnic groups, races, genders, all income levels, they're all represented in that model. So, there can be no grounds for corruption. There's also like so they have to represent basically, and the next thing that has to happen is that you have to have a different education system. So you have to have people that are kind of the whole community in order to prepare people to be members of the parliament. You have to give people education and everything, like kind of civics and sciences and kind of all the scientific changes that are happening, economics, kind of the arts. So you have a kind of, so it's incumbent on an education system. The stronger the education system is, the stronger your people are. The stronger the people are, the stronger the parliament is. The stronger the parliament is, the better leadership you have. And I think that's the way that democracy is preserved, and I think that's the way that it develops again, and that's the way that we start to become in love with democracy again, because we don't really like democracy now. We think that democracy in some ways is flawed and it's a mess and it's betrayed us and it's easily appropriated by interest groups. So we have to take it back, and I think that kind of that model is something that I kind of get excited about. The only problem is we actually have to vote for it. So that puts us in that kind of catch-22 situation. Anyway, I'm kind of rabbiting on a little bit now, so let's just open it up to the floor. And you've listened to me for half an hour. Well done. Fucking hell. Nobody's walked out. I don't believe it, man. I don't believe it. But thanks for your indulgence anyway, folks. Cheers.
That was terrific. Okay, I just have a couple of questions before we open it up to the floor. We're here at the Writers' Festival. Very appropriate that we're talking about power relations in what was once Singapore's parliament. But what I want to speak to you about is writing and literature in this age of division. To what extent do you think the power of human imagination or shared stories, to what extent does literature matter in a divided world?
Oh, that's a kind of big question, and I kind of get quite scared about this, because I kind of wonder in my sort of my more paranoid moments, I wonder if we're moving towards a kind of life where, and this all gets a bit science fiction-y, but things do get kind of science fiction now very quickly, you know. But I wonder if we're moving towards a kind of time in our kind of trajectory where we don't need art anymore. And that if you think about art and culture as being a kind of means of communication, purely as a means of communication, the way we kind of speak to each other and talk to each other and pass things down to each other. We have the power of information technology is so quick now, and it's like, that do we actually need it for that purpose? You know, now what I think is, I think that, the things that make us human are love and art, basically. But these are the things that I think that as we talk about kind of either replacing ourselves with kind of silicon-based life forms that can live forever and go into space, or in some way interfacing with silicon-based life forms, do we need these kind of elements of humanity anymore? And that's quite a scary question, but I think that's one that people are going to be asking more and more over the next 50 years. It's just going to be a long-form kind of question, you know. So I would hope that that they'll all, I would hope that we'd kind of that we would have a model of globalization that would respect and support local cultures and smaller communities and smaller nations, and that we could kind of develop and incubate culture, and that people could actually have a kind of that incubation space before it was shared with the whole world as a whole, with the world as, the entirety. So it's kind of, it's a quite an interesting question. It's like when you think about everything that's happened is about a kind of leveling down. In the last 30 years, everything is about a leveling down of ideas. It's about a distillation. It's like we've become. I noticed, you see everything like kind of Brexit, kind of yes or no, Scottish independence, Catalan independence, sort of Trump or not Trump. Everything polarizes around questions now, around these absolutes, and there's not any real nuance about it anymore. And I think this is the way we seem to be going. Everything seems to be polarizing around kind of two positions, which it kind of makes me feel very uncomfortable. But I think that's the way that's the momentum of our technological change.
Well, I want to pick up on something you mentioned earlier, speaking about the age of assholes. We are on the eve of the US midterm elections, and you've lived in Chicago, in SF, now in Miami. It seems that divisions in the US have sharpened in the run-up to the elections. Take the shooting in Pittsburgh, for example. Do you think these midterm elections could lead to a more divided US, or could this be a catharsis, a time for healing?
I'm not sure about the time for healing thesis. I don't really know about that. I mean, I think that these elections are very important. I think that we'll see who comes out to vote. There's already indications that a lot more young people are going to come out and vote. And that's another thing I would do. I would stop anybody from 50 from voting. I would just ban it, and I would lower the voting age to 14. I mean, it's like kind of I noticed in the Scottish independence referendum, I noticed there's all these people kind of in their 80s and 90s coming out to vote, and why are they coming out to vote when they're, and why are they telling all these like kind of 16-year-olds how they're going to live, what constitutional arrangements they're going to live under for the rest of their lives? Basically, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And these are people from a completely different era that kind of remember a completely different sort of life in society, and they're living at home. They can't get out the house. They've got no interface with anything other than what's coming in the TV. So I mean, I think that we kind of we do have so much to sort out, and we've not got a lot of time to do it because the financial system is going to explode very shortly. We've got these imperatives of climate change, and we just voted on a guy in Brazil who's going to destroy the rainforest, which is kind of nuts, basically.
So just picking up on a couple of strands there, I've read that one of your favorite texts is the book Post-Capitalism, A Guide to Our Future by Paul Mason, which explores much of what you discussed, the existential threat posed to capitalism by the digital revolution. Mason has said that info-capitalism has created a new agent of change, the educated and connected human being. I'm interested, when you visualize this world of the future, what do you imagine could be the kind of human beings in a society where economics may be no longer central to life?
Well, I don't think it's so much about left versus right anymore. I think it's about kind of how do we want to live. We've got this, we're having to cope with a situation we've not really had before. We're having to cope potentially with abundance instead of scarcity, basically. Everything that we've done, all the decisions that we've made have been about scarcity and how do we ration resources. And the answer is, in the future, we don't really need to ration resources, basically. So it's like, what do we kind of do? So I think it's going to come down to authoritarianism versus freedom. Do we feel we need to be told what to do by an authoritative state, or should we be using technology to should we kind of like playing football and making love in the fields and writing poems and all that kind of stuff, and sort of running around with kind of sort of animals and looking at plants and doing sculpture and stuff like that? And I think that would be much better than living under a kind of the heel of a jackboot and kind of being told what to do. But that's just me. I think we have to be, we just have to be a bit less frightened of freedom.
How do some of the ideas that you mentioned work its way into your novels?
Well, I think that one of the things that, when I first wrote my very first book, I thought it was a drugs novel, and then I thought it was a youth novel. And then I realized it's actually neither of these things. It is a novel about deindustrialization, and it's about the first wave of people who were subject to that deindustrialization, the traditional working classes, people in Europe, and particularly in the UK, where the Industrial Revolution kind of came first. And it's about that existential crisis. It's about the crisis that everybody faces now, or is going to have to engage with over the next few years, about what do we do in a world without work? What is the point of us, basically? And that's what these guys were asking themselves. And when you think about it, when you have every kind of society that's in transition, there's almost an attendant plague. There's always a plague that comes along with that transition. When you had the transition from feudalism to capitalism, you had people leaving the fields and going, and, they got thrown into small factory towns, and suddenly people were crammed together for the first time. So you had all these public health things. It was like physical diseases. You had the Black Death and all that kind of stuff with people moving into towns. Now, it's like moving from capitalism into conceptualism. It's like the plague is more of a psychic plague, and to some extent, like drugs are the kind of are the new sort of epidemic of transition. But also, because we're trying to. I mean, drugs are people are taking drugs to try to explore what's going on. I mean, from something like DMT, people are trying to look at different realities and how things are sort of and how they can sort of. I mean, there's so many people I know in America now who microdose. They take little bits of acid and little bits of little portions of mushroom, and they go into the legal office and all that, and they'll work. And they reckon it just gives them a bit of a creative buzz. And there's people that are taking drugs like opiates and heroin, but also prescribed drugs to get away from the pain and anxiety of life. We have built this kind of strange zoo that doesn't really suit us as a species, basically. So we're medicating against that. So drugs are the transitional plague, basically, as we transition from capitalism into conceptualism.
So, just switching gears a little, you are the official ambassador of the Homeless World Cup, which uses street football to empower the homeless. And that cause has helped over 1 million people since its founding. I wonder if that's given you a sense of what gives power to groups who are advocating for change across fault lines or trying to change perceptions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I always feel bad because I'm from I work in art, basically. I'm a writer, and I do music, and my whole life is kind of about basically art, But I think sport is incredibly important to us as well. And again, we're talking about going back to the division of labor and going back to the way that we're that our humanity is being kind of broken up under capitalism, under the division of labor. I think it's natural that people kids will pick up a pen, they'll pick up a paintbrush, they'll kick a ball. I think doing sport and doing art are the most natural things that human beings can do. And I hate that kind of false dichotomy between the two. I mean, I used to hate when I was I loved football, I loved boxing, I loved tennis, and I used to hate that you were designated a sporty person or an arty kid. You were sent to, you were either you had sporty friends or you had arty friends. And I always had both, and I always liked kind of doing both things, and I really enjoyed doing that, and it's like and I think that that's the way we integrate ourselves as human beings, by doing both these things. So I think that artsy people should do more sport, and sporty people should do more art.
That's terrific. Okay, so time for some sports for you. I think we'll bring the mics to you, though. If you have any questions, we're going to open the floor now for you to ask your questions. Let's see a hand go up over there.
Good morning. So I'm writing a thesis on nihilistic behaviour in literary characters, and the rules surrounding that often influences them. So many of your characters display quite appalling nihilistic behaviours. I just wonder what you think it is that appeals to us as readers about those behaviours and for you as a writer.
I think the great thing is that if you're sitting next to some real fucking asshole or psychopath in a bar, you think that's very, very stressful. Like, you know, or if you're kind of going out with somebody like that, it's even more stressful. But if they're in the pages of a book, you can enjoy them in the abstract. You can enjoy all their kind of foibles and their madnesses in the abstract without having to get involved with them, without it impacting on your life. And when they get too much, you can close the page for a bit and go off and make yourself a cup of tea and then come back and then it kind of do it again, basically. So I think that, you know, that's the great thing about kind of looking at these kind of, not so much looking at these characters, because what I like to do is I like to get characters that are quite ordinary in a lot of ways, but they're having a bad time. You know, they're just having, it's like, I mean, like Renton and Trainspotting is having a bad year, basically. He's having a bad kind of couple of years on heroin, but he won't always be like that, and he hasn't always been like that before. Bruce Robertson, the Copper and Filth, is having a really kind of bad year because he's having a mental breakdown. He probably wasn't as bad as that before, and he won't be as bad as that after, basically. So, so you kind of you get people at a bad time. You stick them in a room with somebody else who's having a bad time in a different way, and just watch them kind of, you know, make all the kind of wrong decisions that compound the kind of problems that they have. And it's interesting for me to do that to do that because it's like you think, well, this is actually what happens when you make these decisions. So I don't have to make these decisions myself now. You know, I've managed to kind of abstract this into literature, into characterization. So I don't have to kind of make these kind of mistakes that I probably made in the past and that I've watched other people make.
Okay, another question. Hands up over there. Can we get the mic?
Thank you. I'm afraid to say that I'm from Australia, incredibly embarrassed, but I apologise for what's happening.
But we're all incredibly embarrassed, like, you know what I mean? You can't monopolise the embarrassment. You could say you're Brazilian and incredibly embarrassed, or American and incredibly embarrassed, or British and incredibly embarrassed.
I suppose I am both despairing but also a bit hopeful, because also in Australia what we're seeing is the rise of a lot of women actually thinking of putting their hands up and especially going forward as independent candidates. And also in the US that seems to be the case as well. So I suppose it's a case of, well, I can't do anything worse than what I'm faced with at the moment. So I'm interested in your thoughts about the rise of women, and is there hope there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's absolutely imperative, and I think that you know, it's like we get into this whole thing about the patriarchy, and the patriarchy has been a disaster for men as well as women. I mean, the patriarchy has sent working class men to fight wars and get blown up. It sent them down mines to get silicosis. It sent them on building sites with no health and safety regulations to get kind of to lose limbs and to lose kind of sort of fingers and hands. It's forced them to work and often to keep women basically, and while they work their fingers to the bone. You know, so it's been a total mess for men too. And I think that a lot of men have to realize that, have to recognize that. And I think also it's like incumbent on women to step up too. I think women really need to step up and start changing the whole kind of narrative and start changing everything that's going on, because we can't operate in the way we've been doing. We just can't. And it's, you know, it's like, it's so depressing that like kind of 52% of white women voted for Trump, you know. So I mean, that's something that that has to be kind of has to be challenged. It's not just about men stepping down or stepping aside, and it is about that. Let's be clear, it absolutely is about that. It's also about women stepping up. It's very, very important that this happens and that we build these institutions and that everybody gets involved, and that And I think basically, I mean, again, I'll come out with all these, like the kind of the voting thing, I come out with all these ideas. And I really think that I would like to see kind of like parliaments for about, maybe about 2 or 3 intakes to say that we're going to have 80% women MPs and sort of senators and members of parliament, 20% men, and do this, until for at least a couple of shots of parliament until the whole thing kind of rationalizes it a bit. It can't be, it's going to make for a lot more of an interesting sort of change. It's going to facilitate that kind of shift, and then we can go back to a 50-50 model again.
Thanks. Okay, we have another question over here.
I love the lottery parliament idea. It's something that we've been talking about ourselves previously. I just wanted to ask if we're being driven off the cliff, if the bus is going off the cliff, do we step on the accelerator or do we try and jump on the brake?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing we're all struggling with. I think is there a kind of does it all end in apocalyptic violence, or does it just kind of fade away? These things just dissolve, and then suddenly we organically move into a kind of a new age. And it's we always kind of see revolution in very violent terms and all that, but it's interesting that the more, when you think about it, the more people kind of stockpile wealth, the more the 1% stockpile wealth, the less relevant it actually becomes as a mechanism for anything. I mean, it's like, what do you do when you have a kind of big penthouse building with helicopters? You've got to have somebody to fly these helicopters, so you've got to pay them. How can you actually pay them if nothing's being produced? I mean, take all these big art pieces. How much are they actually worth if nobody else can buy them? There's just a few people that can swap them, basically. So I don't know whether we just kind of let them get on with it, and then it just, and they kind of, and whether the bus just slowly runs out of fuel, and or whether it actually does go over a cliff, and we have to kind of jump hands on and sort of and divert the course of it. I'm still kind of struggling with that right now, to be honest, and I think a lot of people are. And the problem with that is that they win by default. When you think about it that way. So, I suppose the bet hedging is that you really have to do both. You have to kind of you have to get involved and become a more active citizen. But I think you also have to keep space for yourself, because it is such a psychically challenging world, and you have to allow yourself time away from it to be nourished by your friends and your families and your communities and your interests as well.
Great question. Okay, we have several here. Gentleman in the front row, he put his hand up first. Yeah, this one.
You wrote a piece a couple of years ago when the independence vote was happening. You talked about the fact that Scottish independence was actually just as important for England, as you said, for England, for Wales, etc. Given the result of the vote in a few years, sort of to reflect on it, is your opinion still the same?
Very much, yeah. I mean, I'm not so much sort of like pro-Scottish independence as I'm kind of pro-British disintegration. I think that the UK as a state is very hierarchical and elitist. It has these imperialist roots, and it can't really be reformed. It's like there's a bedrock of class elitism, of monarchy, of aristocracy, the public school system, and that's kind of goes right through the whole core of it. And I think that if you get rid of that, and you allow Scotland and England and Wales and Northern Ireland to breathe basically again, you take all that off. I mean, it's like if the great thing to me is for Scottish independence, it would have been about basically abolishing the House of Lords. It would have been about, which the Labour Party has talked about doing for decades and decades. But it's been about abolishing the House of Lords. It's been about abolishing the kind, the influence of the aristocracy in the public schools. And I think if that happened, suddenly people in England would say, well, we want some of that as well, basically. And I think that it is the way to move things on. And I think that if that happened, eventually they would actually come back into that kind of fold with Ireland, as well as some kind of local kind of unit of government, of democratic government again. So I think that it's like, and I feel very much the same about the Catalan thing. I think it's like, it's not so much that I'm pro-Catalan independence. I just think that the Spanish state, as it's constructed, has to go.
We have time for about 2 more questions. The lady in the 3rd row.
Morning, Monica from Discovery. I've watched Trainspotting whenever I'm depressed and finish many cups of ice cream watching it. So thank you for your lecture. Just wondering what your views are about climate change. There's polarizing action taking place between climate action and climate inaction.
Yeah, I mean, to my shame, I don't really know much about it. I don't know much about the science of it, but I'll always trust scientists over flat earth kind of nutters any day of the week, and we have to listen to them. It's like, kind of, do you trust a body of people who've studied this and made it their whole lives work, or do you trust some kind of boorish asshole kind of in the pub, basically? So I know which side I'm on, and I think that we really have to take action against this, because it's, we've got to leave people of the world behind. It's not kind of fair in any way at all that we just tear this place up and trash it for generations to come. We've got to kind of get to that level of responsibility where we're leaving people with something. I mean, there's people here that are kind of young enough to still hopefully be around here for decades and decades and decades to come. And they've got to be breathing this air and stepping out into these rays and kind of, and it's, it's quite a galling thought, so it's like kind of, again, this goes back to my kind of thing, that what are we doing with all these fucking old people kind of sort of in charge of everything, all these kind of strange people, kind of my age and even older, in suits and all that are kind of prancing around in all these parliaments and all these kind of these corporations kind of telling everybody how the world should be run. It's absolute fucking lunacy, and it has to stop.
Okay, we have a final question here. We've got 5 minutes left on the clock.
Hi, so speaking of young, I'm 26 years old, this year, sorry. And my question is, so I just came into studying, the state of things, politics in general, maybe I'd say a couple of years ago, and I realized that it's because I feel there's a very high barrier to entry for my generation to learn about the state of affairs. We were born into an age of technology, and a lot of us are pretty apathetic in general, and I feel like there is a difficulty for us to want to come into all of this and understand all of this while struggling to find a place in this era in society. Do you have any advice for our generation, or how can we influence other people of our generation to care more about such things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, people have been demoralized, and, I see right across everywhere I go, it's like kind of, people are living with their parents more now for longer times because they don't have the money to go on their own, and that's very infantilizing in a way. It kind of stops. But the interesting thing is, it's like kind of it's in terms of knowledge, in terms of what what's actually going on in the world. It's always younger people I meet that are much more clued up than the people that are in all the that are in all these the self-serving people that are in offices, that are in Parliament, that are in corporations, because they're concerned with kind of looking after themselves and not really looking at the bigger picture. So I think that the thing, I mean, I can't, I think that the advice that I would give to young people is don't listen to old fuckers like me, basically. Get stuck in.
He's done so well. He told me this morning that he had some jet lag, but I don't think anybody here could sense that. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Irvine Welsh.
Thank you. Cheers.